the permit goes to Maggie and Josh.
Right.
Okay? How does their nursery legally operate on that property without, they won't have a special permit, and
They'd be an-
there's a
they'd be
preliminary
an-
injunction prohibiting them from operating on the property?
They'd be a contractor.
And they hire other people to work there?
So Maggie and Josh would hire their nursery. to
Yes,
work.
you got it.
Yeah. And they are. Corporation.
I think
Except,
that,
except their nursery is actually the leasehold, has a leasehold interest in the property. I mean, we're creating a fiction upon a fiction upon a fiction here. And
what we're trying to do is get on with it. Let's just, I think that if Maggie and Josh were the applicants, that would be a good thing, and keep their nursery out of it. And keep it as listed in the application. And if you have a problem with that after mulling it over, then I'd let us know, and we'll consider it further. But
so are the Oldfield Family LLC and Fair Nursery Corporation now not applicants? Is that what we're talking about here? Because it says it on this app.
the board,
get to ask the applicant.
the board has indicated that they would prefer it if Maggie and Josh were the applicants.
Which again, I think they are in the application. If I look at this is the
As
application.
listed on the application.
Right.
We like the.
This is the
We
application.
like
Yeah,
the way the
Oldfield family
application
is
is.
the owner.
And putting other applicants on it is, I mean, if you really come up with a problem, let us know. But if you can work with this, do so, because it's better.
We can certainly work with that.
Okay. All right. So, Mr. Dunn, let's, you've got the names of the applicants.
Josh and Maggie.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Now, we're going to leave the name of the applicant and go on to the next point, which was you were going to give some thought about describing for the board how you would break down the operations between a nursery business under the special permit and an exempt agricultural business under General Laws, Chapter 48, Section 3, and the business operations which would be conducted by the landscaping business.
So basically what I did was I didn't redline so it wouldn't show up as a whole lot of redline, but I took sections 2 and 3 of the narrative, and I basically took all of the operations from section 3 and moved them into section 2. You're shaking your head,
I'm
Emily.
shaking my head because it's still not correct.
My intent is that all of the operations, landscaping service, snow and ice management, firewood sales, Christmas tree sales, and essentially the physical operation of the nursery would be within the four corners of the permit. The permit would apply essentially to the operation of the,
Exclusive landscaping activities.
Here's the problem, is in paragraph 2 of the zoning, it does not authorize us to do a special permit for the nursery operations. It only authorizes us to do the landscaping, the firewood, the snow removal, the Christmas trees, and the holiday materials. The nursery has to remain under the Board of Appeals special permit, so it needs to be in 3, not 2.
okay, I will, the intent was to,
But what that means is the mulch sales and the other things that currently occur under the nursery, you either have to decide of all, we're going to take mulch as an example, but there's certain overlap between what's going on in the landscaping and what's going on in the nursery. So you have 2 choices. You can either move that overlap to one or the other, probably the landscaping, or you can say mulch sales at X level will be on the nursery, mulch sales at Y level will be on the landscaping. But the trouble is, for your client, is that anybody coming in to inspect that is going to have to inspect it at a different level. So if all the mulch sales are under landscaping, for example, it makes it easier to inspect.
But they will be presumed to be, all the mulch sales will be presumed to be under the landscaping, even.
That has to
even-
be in too,
Right,
yes.
but that is, but this is I mean, the problem is, of course, that the nursery says, Josh gets up early one day at 5 and he jumps in his Bobcat and he loads up a load of mulch for the nursery at 5 a.m. And some neighbors complain about this. And he said, well, that was just the nursery that we were doing, or that was our agricultural business. And we
Well,
don't.
that's where the hours have to come in
We
too.
don't
yes.
want, we have read the problem we have is that it was pointed out at an earlier time that the statute says that the permit issuing authority, that people can complain to the permit issuing authority about non-compliances with the permit. So we want, if we issue a permit, we want it to be a tight permit, and we don't want people coming in and saying, oh, well, that wasn't part of our landscaping business, that was something else. We want, if there is something that just is totally outside of the realm of landscaping. I mean, mulch is the essence of landscaping, and so mulch sales should be part of the landscaping business. But if there is something that is clearly outside of, and planting trees, that can be landscaping, planting shrubs, delivering materials, all that can be landscaping. And we don't want people coming in and saying, oh, well, that was not part of the landscaping, that was nursery. Don't want that to happen because we've seen what's happened with the current permit. We've got 5 Superior Court cases, and how many references to the building commissioner? A ton of them. If we issue a permit, we want everyone to, we want it to be we really want it almost to be self-executing.
Understood. And I think that's clearly what the Oldfields want as well. They want a very simple, clear-cut, this is
Right.
what it is. And it's simplest, I think, I will evaluate and we can consider with the board clearly what elements of nursery aren't regulated by this permit. I'm not sure what they would be. I think the hours of operation would be regulated by the permit. I think the deliveries of materials, I mean, if you've got a truckload of shrubs that are coming in to be planted on the site, you don't want them to say, well, that truck can come in at 6 o'clock because that's a nursery.
But I think that's what
delivery.
we're looking for. So to keep the tree reference alive, how many trees is too many trees for a nursery operation? Is selling 1 tree on a Sunday a nursery operation where selling 3 isn't? I think we need the applicant to make that decision and present it to the planning board, and the planning board can decide whether we agree with your estimate. But it seems like that would need to be clear.
And we'll try to be clear. It's extremely difficult to be clear.
Which is the problem the building inspector has.
We can be So basically, we understand, we want to make
Introduce
everything.
yourself for the viewing audience. Be advised that you're being recorded.
Yes, so I'm Maggie Oldfield, 237 Hillside Street. We understand, everyone wants clarity, as do we. And that's one of the reasons kind of where we positioned and relayed out everything. So when, if ever anybody wants to come and inspect, all of the mulch and all of our bulk materials sort of be in one area. So we understand to get something, you have to give stuff up. And we understand that certain parts of our operations are protected usage, certain materials are protected usage. And so we're willing to make things easier and have one quantity for both aspects of our business. So if Prawn Deck comes up, he can easily see and judge and quantify. And I think it's easier if its quantities are the same no matter the product, so he can visually see the levels, like a do not exceed amount, and he can come up and take a look, and wherever those products go during the day, if it goes to our nursery to mulch in our trees, that's fine. If it goes to your house and you install it, that's fine, because to me, that's not landscaping. Landscaping to me is you hiring us to install, or a landscaping job. So we have these piles, and it's one quantity. And our hours of operation are pretty much laid out. Again, I know we're allowed under the nursery to have deliveries at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m., but our intent is not to. Our intent is to have the hours 7 to 6, Monday through Friday, 8 for open for business, 7 to 6, Monday through Friday, Saturday 8 to 5. No landscaping activities happen on Sunday, but understand that we have the right, if you come in to buy a tree and you have a truck, as a nursery operator, I should be able to use a Bobcat to load a tree into the back of your truck. I understand that outgoing deliveries are a problem on Sunday, but we are still a seasonal business. Most of our activities happen on weekends. And I understand that restricting possibly outgoing deliveries from 10 to 3, which are, the hours are outlined here, perfectly fine with that. If someone comes in at 9 a.m. to buy a tree to get loaded into a truck, I kind of have a little problem with that, because under this, it says I can't start a Bobcat to 10. I have a problem with it, but if it's gonna break it, I'll wait to 10. I don't want to, because they could go up to my competitor and buy it at 8.
So then section 2 in here is going to say that the storage of materials are under this permit. But section 3, which is just a description of the other businesses that are happening, business activities that are happening on the site and don't go into the special permit, would refer to Thayer Nursery growing, nourishing, et cetera, managing fruits and vegetables. So the things that we authorize that actually go into the physical special permit will be under 2. Anything that comes under the nursery businesses that's not ours or storage or whatever goes under 3. Anything under the agricultural exemption that remains under there goes under 3.
I'm not sure I understand what you said, but
Me? What I said?
He totally understood you, it's me.
I think that I would like you, just because I, spend my time reading General Laws, Chapter 48, Section 3, and it's pretty hard to understand, but I gather that you have cracked the issue and understand what you're entitled to do without any regulation from the town.
I feel like
But not what you feel, what the law
what
allows you.
my interpretation of the
But
law,
your interpretation of the law.
as I understand it, is there are certain protected usage that goes with farming, and I believe that there is a question as to what is farming. And Mike brought it up last night. You do not have to start anything from seed to be a farmer. The key words in farming is maintaining, nourishing, and managing. It means that I have to take possession of the plant material
I've
and
got-
actually care for it.
I've got the statute, why don't I read it?
It's in your book.
General Laws, Chapter 128, Section 1A. Farming or agriculture shall include farming in all of its branches, and the cultivation and tillage of the soil, dairying, the production, cultivation, growing, and harvesting of any agricultural, floricultural, or horticultural commodities, the growing and harvesting of forest products upon forest land, the raising of livestock, including horses, the keeping of horses as a commercial enterprise, the keeping and raising of poultry, swine, cattle, and other domesticated animals used for food purposes, bees, fur-bearing animals, and any forestry or lumbering operations performed by a farmer who is hereby defined as one engaged in agricultural or farming as herein defined, or on a farm as an instant to or in conjunction with such farming operations, including preparations for market, delivery to storage, or to market, or to carriers for transportation to market. And so that's what farming or agriculture is defined as.
And that is obviously very clear. It's so clear that there are a lot of activities before the Superior Court determining what's what. So I think it is more appropriate for us, the way I interpreted the preparation of this bylaw and what we're applying for is that the town's going to regulate under a permit the activities that occur on this property to the protection of the neighbors. And I don't know how to do it any other way. I don't want a scenario where we've got conflict over what you can do under one permit or over another. And
I understand
I don't think
that.
that's where it operates to anybody's benefit, including the owners.
Look, I understand that, but I'm looking at the way it's written, and you've got under 2, nursery. Thayer Nursery grows, nourishes, maintains, and manages fruits, vegetables, berries, ornamental plants and shrubs, flowers, et cetera, et cetera. That's all stuff that is not governed by paragraph 2. However, you go down about 5 or 6 lines, and it says the nursery services include the sale of agricultural and earth materials that include compost, soil, mulch, stone, masonry projects. That goes under the landscaping. The next one, tools and equipment that are needed for tending after a garden or landscape. Firewood goes under the landscaping, but the tools and equipment isn't under the landscaping. All I'm saying is 2 needs to be absolutely specific to what we're going to authorize in the special permit. And if it's not going to be authorized in the special permit based on paragraph 2 of the zoning that town meeting passed last year, it shouldn't be in section 2.
I think why it's in section 3 is because we can sell it for pickup. We can sell it for small quantities for pickup if you come to the site. So that's why I think it's a bit reiterative and it's in there. But I understand, as far as the special permit goes, that you want it all.
I'm less,
the others.
yeah, I'm less concerned about what's in 3, just because that doesn't move forward to the special permit. It's just a description of the other businesses that are there, but I'm very concerned about what's in 2, because that's what moves forward.
Yeah.
We will keep moving.
All right. Ed?
A question, Mr. Chairman, about, I'm not aware that we're making any progress here, but at the end of last night's meeting, a lady stood up and said that she has some very grave concerns about encroachments upon her property, and she was on the verge of being emotional about it. Can we tell this lady that we will address her concerns tonight or next meeting or whenever? But I don't, that was the last piece of business last night. I don't hear anything about it today.
Well, my intention is to get the public comments we had a question on the floor about what the activities on the site were. We attempted to get some clarification of that issue tonight, and you're right that we didn't make a great deal of progress, but there's no harm in trying. What we're going to do, if you look at your zoning, and this is after we get our general public comments, we're going to go through 4A through S individually. And we're going to take the application, and we're going to read the zoning, and we're going to read the proposed plan, and we're going to comment on the proposed plan. And the concerns that the abutter expressed are going to be able to be covered probably under several of those plans. But we're not writing a permit right now. We're taking comments on the application. And then we will discuss whether or not we will discuss where we're going. And that is the way I intend to proceed with this. And it's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of time. But I do want to get the general comments
Okay.
on the application down first. And I understand if I could wish that it would go faster, I would wish it. But
I wish we could just assure the lady that she has not been forgotten.
we haven't forgotten you. Okay?
I'm not sure.
Well, I have.
She's satisfied.
No, we understand that there are abutter concerns here.
Thank you.
And that we want to, we're not going to ignore them. This is not an easy task. Okay. Who else would like to be heard on this application? We have, I think that we have completed the request that we made for more clarification for the time being. I mean, the matter is still somewhat unclear, but as we get into the specifics, we may be able to flush out some more details. Mr. Joe Henning, you want to be heard, and come up. And you probably, you other people can leave the table for the, so that he has the entire floor to himself.
I'm Phil Johanning, 23 Parkwood Drive. I'm not sure why we're getting into the Dover Amendment. As Mr. Dunn said last night, this has never been an issue. We have Mr. Leonard, Mrs. King, and Mr. Hurley, who are all attorneys. Mr. DeLuna, who is the attorney for Thayer Nursery and for the Oldfields, came before the board, the Zoning Board of Appeals, all attorneys. He made the argument about the Dover Amendment, and they stopped it. They said that they weren't going to listen to that because the primary use of the property was not agricultural. Then we've gone before Judge Broussard, Judge Davis, Judge Wilson, Judge Garsh, and the same arguments were made and the same arguments were stopped. So why do we want to introduce this obfuscation into this this application? It doesn't make any sense to me. It seems to me that you're perpetuating the issues that have gone on way too long. If you look at the property, it's 5 acres. And a lot of the property is taken up by residential use. If you look at the economics, and you say, okay, the primary use must have something to do with how money is made. So you look at the product sold, 1,000 cords of wood will generate between $550,000 and $1 million, depending on how it's sold. If it's sold by the quarter cord, it'll be $1 million. If it's sold all in cords, it'll be 550,000. Somewhere in the middle, we're coming to where the number actually is. I think it's 800,000. Just me. Actually, if you look on Thayer's website, they sell stands and smaller quantities of wood for higher prices. So it could get close to $1 million. If you look at $1 million of revenue from firewood, it seems to me that firewood has to be near the top of the list. But if you say that landscaping is a bigger money earner, then maybe you say they make 1.2 million in landscaping. So if selling a couple of trees gets them, let's say, 200,000, the primary use is not growing and selling trees. The primary use is probably landscaping.
Or wood
firewood.
sales. But
Yeah.
what you're suggesting is that under the Dover Amendment, which does require the primary activity produce the most dough, I think. In any event, you're suggesting that landscaping and wood sales, accounting for more than 50% of their sales, make it very unlikely that there would be a Dover Amendment argument.
Protection. And so I believe we can't look at those things. We have to consider everything on the property to be commercial.
Well, those aren't Phil's numbers. There was an affidavit submitted by Maggie to the ZBA as part of this process, and I think it was also submitted in one of the court proceedings that talks about the amount of revenue that's generated by each business. And that was a material factor in the judge's decision when he was ruling on granting both the town the preliminary injunction against Thayer, and in denying Thayer's application for a preliminary injunction to stay the ZBA's decisions. So, I think that what the issue is that if the Dover Amendment applies to a particular use within Thayer Nursery, it doesn't cover all the activities that are going on there. It's never been read that expansively.
Well, we did ask what use the Dover Amendment covered, and we haven't been given an answer to that question as of yet.
I guess I gave it, and that's zero.
You said, yes, and
I'm up here to comment as a citizen, and
no, I
that's my thought.
understand. It just seems
And
to me
having
that the
been-
Dover Amendment may not be, as far as this application is concerned, I don't see that there is any mention of the Dover Amendment in the application.
Having been before Wilson, Broussard, Davis, and none of them accept this, none. I have to say that most of us are not attorneys, so we have to look at judges who are in that realm, and they don't buy it.
I don't think.
So should we? No.
I don't think we are.
Well, I don't think anyone here is looking to hide behind the Dover Amendment. I personally was happy to get an explanation of the Dover Amendment just because I don't know anything about it. And so I was happy to have some background on it tonight.
Right.
It doesn't, personally speaking, it doesn't affect my decision about what happens here because I see it as something completely different. I think we're working on this. If they're trying to use Dover Amendment to say something else, that they can do something else. That's outside of my purview as far as I'm concerned. That's a matter for what you're dealing with right now in the courts.
That's why we're trying to get them to specify what it is that they want to be included in the special permit if we grant it, so that that is very specific to the requirements of the zoning.
That's actually a very good segue into what Phil and I and John wanted to bring up, and that has to do with the fact that there's and again, these are requirements of the bylaw amendment. We had no say in them, but the bylaw amendment talks about creating essentially a 2012 baseline for the size of activities on the property. And so, what I'd like to do is just basically address the portion of my memo, which is section B on page 3. It talks about how,
Well, one thing, Mr. Dunn, why don't you introduce yourself again?
Matthew Dunn, I'm an attorney, I represent Philip Joining and John Rowe, who are butters to Thayer at 23 Parkwood Drive.
This is the January memo?
This is the, sorry, the March 23rd memo.
And which section was it again? I'm sorry.
Page 3, section B.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Captain, applicants have still presented no evidence to as to the extent that their July 2012 baseline activities. And I'll read it just for the benefit of the people who don't have a copy. As specifically stated in the bylaw amendment, the activities for which the planning board can authorize by special permit under the bylaw amendment are expressly limited only to those which were conducted in 2012, and that's found in section 2 of the bylaw amendment. Moreover, the bylaw amendment restricts the size of those activities to a level no greater than the level of that activity existing in 2012, unless there is a reliable showing that a greater level would be consistent with the purpose of this subsection and cause no adverse effects on abutters or nearby residents. So, sort of as a prerequisite, you have to figure out what was the 2012 level of activity, because that's the only way you're going to be able to gauge whether they're in conformity with what the bylaw requires, and that is to restrict the activities to what they were in 2012. So first you got to figure out what they were in 2012. The bylaw amendment does not allow any applicant to introduce any new activity on its property and expressly limits the existing activities to the level at which the applicant was conducting them in 2012. Although Mr. Joenning and Mr. Rowe pointed this requirement out at the public hearing before this board on January 8th of 2015, sorry, that says 14, should say 15, Thayer still has not supplemented its application with any information concerning the size and scope of its retail sales, including its farmers markets and other special events, and commercial landscaping, construction, snow plowing, and firewood sales business on the subject property in 2012. As previously stated, without this baseline information, which is required under the bylaw amendment, it would be impossible for the planning board to determine the appropriate size and scope of the commercial activities that Thayer Nursery seeks to undertake on the subject property under the special permit that's at issue now. This in turn would defeat the stated purpose of the bylaw amendment, which is to limit these commercial activities to a level no greater than the level that the activity existed in 2012. The most accurate means to establish what the baseline level of activity was on the subject property in 2012 is for Thayer Nursery to supplement its application with inventory, sales reports, or other accounting records for each line of business that it conducted on the subject property in 2012. These figures can then be verified by an independent accounting firm against Thayer's 2012 tax returns. After this baseline is set, which will reveal the size and scope of Thayer's commercial activities on the subject property in 2012, Thayer should be required to submit the same information to the planning board on an annual basis in order for it to prove that it is not operating at a greater level than the 2012 baseline. This is consistent with the purpose of the bylaw amendment.
Well, you suggest a form of evidence that Thayer might produce, but what they have to produce is satisfactory evidence of the 2012 level. In other words, evidence that the planning board feels is sufficient to establish the level. And it doesn't necessarily have to be tax returns, and they've we will ask them to describe what their methodology is on doing this, and we'll see if we think it to be adequate. But you raised the point that the 2012 level has to be reliably established.
Correct, right. And right, I mean, you're right. What I've suggested would probably be the most accurate way to determine that. It's not the only way to determine that. So, the information that's been provided to date, from my reading of it, is insufficient to figure out what was going on there, what the levels were in 2012. I mean, just with regards, for an example, the snow plowing aspect of the application, there's two invoices that really make very little sense to me. One is to an entity that's in Dover, New Hampshire, and the other entity it provides snow plowing services to residential people already. They're snow plowing a snow plower. And, you know, I need some sort of explanation as to how that demonstrates that they were operating a snow plowing business on the property in July of 2012. I mean, that's the type of insufficient information that's been provided to this board, that you can't form a baseline of the 2012 activities from. You just can't. So, you know, that's one part.
Okay. What
That's-
is the level of, we have that, we understand that the bylaw requires that we know what it is. I
Right.
mean, we have to determine what that level of activity is.
So, all
Plus.
right, so that's my point on
Okay.
the baseline. You know, we had talked about the, you know, yesterday, there was a lot of talk about the drainage plan. In its current form, it's not, there's three requirements of the bylaw. It says the bylaw requires Thayer Nursery to show that the drainage measures will not cause adverse drainage impacts on the neighbor's property. You know, as Mr. Joenning and Mr. Rowe talked about and demonstrated with photographs of the board, you know, and I understand no special permit has been issued yet, but what they've done to date has actually made the conditions on their property worse than it's ever been. I mean, there's a drain that drains into their yard, into their property, and causes property damage. So something needs to get done with that. You know, one of it is the drainage measures will not increase water flows onto neighboring properties. I just talked about that. Will not create ponding on neighboring properties. You know, that's sort of all along the same line. All this stuff is happening right now, and you know that this needs to be addressed. That's you know, that's our position with regards to the drainage plan. You know, and it sort of raises a broader issue as to, with regards to the site improvements, and that's just sort of cast a wide net over what's being proposed. Will those be completed? Will those need to be completed before Thayer reintroduces the activities onto the property, or is that something that's going to be an ongoing basis? Because there's no carrot for Thayer to do these things, and they've, you know, in all due respect, they've had substantial compliance issues in the past, and it's very well documented, and it's been spoken about at length to this board. So, you know, if this is going to happen, the requirements that we're talking about here need to be put in place beforehand, and they need to be shown to be effective to mitigate the activities that are on the property. Otherwise, they're useless. So, you know, that's where we stand with sort of with the drainage plan and with regards to the site improvements generally. The lighting plan, Thayer still has not provided this board with any plan that quantifies the intensity of the lighting used on the subject property or measures the light spillover onto the neighboring properties and adjoining streets. And I think that, Phil, did you bring that?
I didn't, but one thing I would.
If you have to,
Phil Johanning, 23 Parker Drive. One thing that it says in the lighting plan is that they will put some kind of shield on. They have photographs of every kind of light, but they don't show how the shield would work or where they would buy it or anything. And I guess I would say this lighting is not permitted today, not permitted today. So if they're going to tilt the lights down or they're going to put a shield around them, why don't they do it today when this lighting is not permitted? And so I guess I don't understand the lighting plan, and I don't understand why they don't execute it so that we can see how well it works. And with respect to lights being turned off, the lights along their driveway don't ever seem to be turned off. So, you know, like when, and on the side of Hannah's house, there's a new light that shines right in my bedroom window. And I don't know that that was shown on the lighting plan. Now, maybe they'll say she's not part of the nursery, but she is occupying a house that's on the nursery lot. And so if there's a light on the side of her house that's shining into my bedroom window, I think it needs to be regulated like any other lighting on the property.
One thing, currently, there is no lighting restriction.
No, it's in the original special permits.
Oh,
In the 1987, in the 1967,
What
there's
is-
lighting restrictions in all of those.
so what does it say?
Well, that you
Wow.
can't have this, that you can't,
They
I
can't
don't
have
remember
lights?
verbatim, but
Okay,
let's dig them out.
Okay. I'll take a look.
So the,
I mean, obviously, what the Board of Appeals provided is still in force for the nursery. And we're not going to, at least I don't think we're going to make an exception for the landscaping business to what the Board of Appeals required for the nursery.
It's hard to get Mr. Prondak to come up at 10 o'clock at night, you know. So enforcement is challenging.
Okay.
so just, going through the memo that I submitted, the next issue is regard to traffic in the area. And as Chairman Whiteside had pointed out in one of the previous meetings, that, there are these requirements under the bylaw, but then there's also the general requirements of 48 Section 9. And one of those requirements is that, just like any other special permit, a special permit can only be granted if the zoning relief can be done without substantial detriment to the public good. In this case, Thayer Nursery is seeking this board's permission to make and receive truck deliveries using the narrow roadways of the Scotts Woods neighborhood. As this implicates the health, safety, and welfare of Milton residents sharing those same narrow roadways, this board should require Thayer Nursery to submit a professional traffic study with its application, which explains the impact the proposed truck deliveries will have on abutters and nearby residents, and sets forth a proposal to mitigate any adverse effects. Now, I know that Mr. Corcoran had talked about the number of deliveries being made to Thayer Nursery. That's only half of the equation with regards to the traffic impact that's going to be felt in the area. As I think that it was discussed previously, just with regards to the kiln-dried firewood, those arrive by 18-wheel trucks and delivered, I think, 17 cords at a time. And then it's used, the property is used as a storage facility where dump trucks are loaded up, and then those dump trucks are going to deliver those 17 cords to various locations. So obviously, there's going to be, for every one delivery of an 18-wheel truck, there's going to be a multiple of that deliveries coming off-site. And those are in large pickup trucks. Just because this might have been happening in the past doesn't mean that it doesn't warrant a study here as to what is the impact here. What is the best way to do this? If this is going to happen, how are they going to do this that's going to be the least impactful to the surrounding neighborhood? Because what was happening before was not to the satisfaction of the abutters. And I think that one of the primary purposes of this bylaw amendment was to allow Thayer Nursery to reintroduce certain uses, but to do so in a way that doesn't adversely affect or minimizes the adverse effect of those activities on abutters. So we need to understand what the traffic flow is in order to understand how to improve it. And so that's where we're coming from with regards to a traffic study being done and the results of that being implemented in Thayer Nursery's activities on the site.
So on the traffic study, just so we don't lose it, it does seem to me that once we determine the amount of traffic that we're going to allow, if there were to be a traffic study, that would have to be known. So I just point that out to you. It may be that there is information needed if the traffic, unless it was a, but of course they can't measure the traffic as it currently exists because the landscaping business doesn't operate now. So you can see that what a traffic study right now might be a little, might be hard to get all the necessary information for. But I mean, I think that we need to determine when we get to the traffic section, whether or not we feel that a traffic study is necessary.
I mean, I know that there's ways to flush out what the anticipated number of vehicles on, you know, that the activities would generate. I mean, that can be done, you know.
Let me
So-
just, okay, continue.
All right, so, and I'm almost done. 'cause I'm sure-
Just on the traffic, before we go on, page 9, to the extent that we can continue to just move this dialogue, you have total deliveries to nursery, as Mr. Dunn points out, those are the 18-wheelers, but I would assume that there can be some, perhaps, I shouldn't assume, but perhaps there's some ITE standard or something that would allow some determination of what that impact would then be on deliveries. You may know better than I do.
There is, yeah. They'll name a landscaping business, they'll name a nursery business, schools, churches, restaurants, anything.
Right.
And they'll take square footage and they'll say that should generate X amount of vehicles. And then the engineer can determine that so many, 40% will probably exit and go south on Forest, and 60% will go north on Forest. And after that, 60% goes north on Forest, so much will go east on
Right.
Hillside, so much will go west on Hillside.
The bylaw itself doesn't have a traffic section in it. It has an operations section. So when we get to the operations section, we can discuss this. But there is no specific traffic plan requirement.
So just in closing, because I'm sure that you folks are sort of tired of hearing my voice, but, you know, if I could just sort of direct you back to the, you know, both my memo from March 23rd, and then also, you know, I don't know which version, if I'd asked the board to adopt my January
We have
8th, 2015 memo.
introduced that.
Okay. And just take a look at that, because, you know,
The January 8th memo.
January 8th, 2015, or 7th, or I don't know which one.
Eight.
You know, the bylaw amendment itself indicates that the planning board may only grant a special permit for landscaping business where it finds compliance with the purpose of the zoning amendment and with all of the foregoing terms, conditions, standards, and requirements. You know, you guys have a lot on your plate, and what you do impacts this neighborhood for the foreseeable future. And as Mr. Prondak indicated, there need to be, you know, and I'm sure that you will, give this a thorough analysis, hold there to the requirements of the bylaw, and that's what we'd ask.
But one thing you say for the foreseeable future, what actually the bylaw provides is that if we issue a permit, it be time limited between 1 and 3 years, I think, for the initial permit. And the reason is, of course, that the bylaw contemplates that when we get back together in a year, 2 years, 3 years, however long it is, that the evidence as to how the permit has worked during the term of the permit will be a major factor in determining whether or not it's reauthorized. I mean, that is, in many ways, that is the ultimate enforcement mechanism. I mean, if the building inspector doesn't get out there to inspect, it doesn't mean that at the end of the permit, that if it is shown there has been, it isn't working, that it isn't working with these best efforts, whatever the best efforts may be, determined by the board, then presumably there will either have to be better efforts specified, or the permit would be not reauthorized.
Well, I think that that's why setting specifics or including specific requirements and standards in whatever decision that you wind up coming up with is very important, because that's going to be the base for which, when we come back in here in a year or 2 years or 3 years, we're going to be working off of. So, like I said, you guys have a lot of work in front of you. I appreciate the fact that you've listened to me. I know that it gets contentious at times. I know that you guys put in your best efforts here. And Mr. Joanning and Mr. Rowe appreciate that. So that's all.
Okay. Yes, sir. Do you have a question, Emily?
Yes, I do. Just to note that
Mr.
the
Dunn?
building commissioner, no, not from Mr. Dunn, but it was something that he said that made me think of it. The building commissioner, Joe Prondak, had written a memo on February 26, 2015,
Yeah.
and we might want to make sure that that's reintroduced into this new
Would you
hearing
give
as well.
that to Tim and ask that he,
It's got my comments on it, though, but I think you probably have a clean copy in your files.
You have a key
You've got
copy.
it?
Yeah,
you've sent it to me.
I'll make sure a clean copy is.
okay,
Thank
so
you.
the building commissioner's memo will be made part of the record. Yes, sir, Mr. Rowe.
John Rowe, 23 Parkwood Drive. I'd like to play a video if I could. Bill, can you help me with the projector? We've had a lot of talk about firewood, and so I thought I would just show you. Mr. Cochran has talked about how quiet the loading or unloading of firewood is, and I just thought I would show you. They took a video off Thayer Nursery's Facebook page that shows the unloading of firewood. So the sound is just on my machine. I don't know if you can, it's going to be that loud, but. I don't think this started at the beginning, so I'll play it again. It's just 10 seconds. So this is actually was taken from Thayer's Facebook page. So this is an actual tractor-trailer truck unloading the firewood. This wood warehouse is about 100 feet from my property line, probably 200 feet from my home. And I can hear this in my home with the windows closed. And also the vibration in the house. You can imagine that there's vibration with these tractor-trailer trucks coming in. And one of, and Mr. Dunn brought this up. Mr. Dunn brought this up that, we have the number of deliveries coming into Thayer Nursery. This is 17 cords of wood being delivered by their application at least twice a week during the season. And they have 5 dump trucks that deliver the wood, and most of the wood is delivered on Saturday and Sunday. So what happens is the dump trucks are loaded, the front-end loaders, which I can hear from my home, dumped into the dump trucks, and then we have deliveries all weekend long going in and out of there, which, the diesel exhaust is at times overwhelming. It permeates the neighborhood, especially in the winter. Sometimes the air is heavy. When it's humid, the air is very heavy. And diesel dump trucks, I believe, have to be started in the cold weather and idled. And I believe, and I think you probably come to the same conclusion that I have come to, that this is not a landscaping operation. This is a very high-impact industrial operation that I don't believe belongs in a residential neighborhood. This bylaw was written to protect the neighbors and to hopefully preserve the residential character of the neighborhood. And I don't believe an industrial operation like this, that it's a wood distribution business that distributes 1,000 cords of wood in a 6-month period. That's very, very high impact. It may help if you went over to Eagle Farm. Eagle Farm sells cash and carry firewood at their store on Randolph Avenue. It's very neatly stacked, and it probably is maybe a half a cord of wood that they store there for cash and carry. I have no issue with the current firewood sales at Thayer Nursery. The special permit that they have from the ZBA allows them to sell cash and carry, and it's quite specific in the ZBA ruling what they can do, and it clearly says no machinery can load the wood, and wood can be loaded by hand into trunks of cars, SUVs, things of that nature. And I think that that is an appropriate use for Thayer Nursery to allow people to come up and cash and carry. We have no issue with that. But this is very, very high impact. One more thing I'd like to bring up. I spoke at this meeting a few weeks ago concerning compliance. Attorney Cochran was here a year ago in front of this board and had talked about how Thayer Nursery is under cease and desist. They're not allowed to do these things. And that they've been a bad neighbor. They have not been a good neighbor, but they've mended their ways. He went in front of, and the planning board here recommended approval for the zoning change to allow them to reintroduce the landscaping, the wood sales. Mr. Cochran went in front of the warrant committee and said the same thing. Thayer Nursery over the years had not listened to neighbors' concerns. The neighbor concerns didn't start when Phil and I moved into the neighborhood. They've been going on for decades. And you can see the records at the ZBA. But he said they've mended their ways. Then he went in front of town meeting and said the same thing. And town meeting said, well, let's give them a second chance. And they voted to make this zoning amendment. They voted for the amendment. Let's give them a second chance. If you were Thayer Nursery, if I were Thayer Nursery, I'd have said, you know what? They're giving me a second chance. I'm going to comply with the cease and desist order that the ZBA gave me, and I'm going to cease and desist my landscaping operations. But they didn't. They kept it up. They continued to run their operation. Mr. Prondak wrote them letters, told them to cease and desist, and they didn't. And finally, the town of Milton went to Norfolk Superior Court and got a court order. Judge Wilson signed a court order demanding that Thayer Nursery cease and desist their landscape operations. Does this sound like an outfit that was going to say, thank you, Town of Milton, thank you, town meeting members, thank you, planning board, thank you, warrant committee. We know you gave us a second chance, and we're really going to abide by the town laws and regulations. They didn't do that. You can go up to the property today, and they have their excavator parked there, their lawn care van parked there, all of their landscaping equipment is on the property, it's all stored there. As we speak today, there have been no changes. I don't believe that this is an organization that will ever adhere to any regulation this board or the town of Milton ever puts on them. Their past behavior has proven that they will not, that they will do as they please. I mean, this is factual. You know, I submitted a copy of Judge Wilson's cease and desist order the last hearing. I've got another copy. I can give it to you. I don't know if this is a new hearing, a new application. You know, we've gone through that.
It's a new hearing, and why don't you do that? Give it to Tim, and he
Okay.
will.
Also, and I forgot to mention the artisans market. You know, there are just so many things that Thayer seems to snub their nose at the town and the people who gave them a second chance. And I guess I'm just very concerned about, people talk about enforcement. Well, which came first, the chicken or the egg? We have non-compliance. And that's the issue, non-compliance. And Emily, at one of the hearings you asked that you wanted to hear from Thayer to see how they were going to address the non-compliance issue. We haven't seen any of that. And I don't believe that this organization can self-regulate, if you will. There is no way that this organization has proven that it could ever self-regulate. And you know,
But the
don't
idea-
take my word for it. We have the facts. This has gone to court. We have the ZBA rulings, and we have all of the neighbors that this has been going on for decades.
The idea, of course, is that if we require them to do a fair amount of work so that they can conduct their landscaping business, and the question of when we would require the work to be done is something we will discuss. But if they do the work and then disregard the plan, they run the risk of having a very short-lived business.
How is that? Because I'm going to be here in front of you? You know, this is a very, very, there has to be something put in place to regulate. You know, am I the regulator? You know, I see the violation, I go to the building commissioner, and the building commissioner says, well, I didn't see that, and then I get my evidence, and then I go in front of this board and present the evidence. And then we go to Superior Court. You know, there has to be a way to regulate this, and what we've seen is that self-regulation doesn't work. You know, right now, they're not in compliance. And we have another ZBA hearing coming up concerning the state of affairs right now. You know, I appreciate this board and the work you do.
What is the ZBA hearing that's coming up?
Phil, has that been scheduled yet?
Yeah, that's April 30th.
It should be in the Milton Times.
And
But you tell me, it's in the Milton Times.
Was that an enforcement order that you appealed from the building commissioner? or-
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And there's also another case in Superior Court. So my point is, the neighbors aren't looking for trouble. And this zoning ordinance was presented to the town meeting, and they voted on it, saying that this was here to protect the neighbors and the residential character of the neighborhood. And I don't see how allowing that wood, I don't see how allowing a large-scale, we need to look at what goes on. We talk about the deliveries of these materials, you know, mulch and crushed stone and gravel and bricks and cement. It's delivered there, and then it's promptly loaded onto flatbeds, dump trucks, diesel dump trucks, and this is a staging area for this type of business. Believe me, we have no issue with the nursery. It's the landscaping activities, and sometimes I wonder if people actually, this is not somebody putting a lawnmower on a truck and leaving every morning. At 7 a.m., they start their landscaping activities, which is really the staging of material. All the materials that were delivered there are loaded onto dump trucks, flatbed trailers, etc., via the front-end loaders, which are very noisy, diesel. You know, the pollution alone is indicative to a residential neighborhood, especially in the Scotts Woods hillside neighborhood. I mean, the most bucolic neighborhood in the town. And I think that, I'm just hoping that you can consider these things. And it's not going to be easy, but, you know, a lot of these activities could really be the staging area for all this stuff. There's no reason why it couldn't be in an industrial site where it belongs. And I just want you to really think about what the zoning ordinance was for, what the town meeting members voted on, and the town meeting you were all there, the town meeting members voted on this zoning change because it was presented to them that it would protect the neighborhood and protect the neighbors. So I just want you to think about that. Think about, you just saw the wood being, you know, delivered. This isn't mamby-pamby stuff. This is high-impact industrial